The question is that this House has considered the e-petition relating to making the production, sale and use of cannabis legal. Right Honourable Peter Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Some years ago, members of the press went round, members of both front benches, and asked whether they'd ever consumed cannabis. I found I was one of the very few who'd never done so then and haven't since. I'm not an advocate, except, I might add, for medical use. And I'm sure we could all agree that cannabis and derivatives of it should be made available for medical use when it can bring the relief which the honourable member has just described and which many of us will have heard about from our own postbacks. Even Queen Victoria allegedly used cannabis to relieve menstrual pain. And if it's a Victorian value, then surely it can be made more widely available. But there are practical reasons for wanting to move to legalisation. First of all, attempts to prohibit the sale and use of cannabis have failed. It's readily available and widely used. Until recently, indeed, I believe still, we've had a higher level of usage in this country where it's illegal than in Holland where it's legally available. Nearly 30% of citizens of this country have at some stage or other used cannabis, and few of them had any difficulty in obtaining it. So it's failed. And it's failed despite the fact that 80% of the effort on the so-called war of drugs goes on trying to prohibit the use of cannabis. If we were to provide some legal outlets for cannabis, this enforcement effort and the treatment effort and so on could be diverted to tackling hard drugs, which really do harm people, enslave people, and sometimes kill people. Thirdly, keeping a law on the statute books which is widely ignored and impossible to enforce effectively undermines faith not just in that law, but in law and the legal system more generally. One of the key reasons used by advocates of prohibition is that cannabis is supposedly a gateway drug. They say that once people have tried a soft drug like cannabis, it awakens a desire for stronger drugs and leads them on to cocaine and heroin. So they must stop going down the slippery slope. There's no evidence for that at all. The truth is that it's only the criminalisation of the supply of cannabis that makes it into a gateway drug. Because cannabis users can only obtain it from illegal sources, they are forced into contact with the illegal gangs who will try to persuade them to move on to hard drugs as well. Prohibition of cannabis drives soft drug users into the arms of hard drug pushers. What I invariably find is that most of the arguments against the legalisation of cannabis are based on the supposed health risks. Now, I entirely accept that heavy and sustained use of cannabis can be harmful. But at the time of writing my pamphlet, I quoted the Lancet review of all the medical evidence on the use of cannabis, which said, on the medical evidence available, moderate indulgence in cannabis has little effect on health, and that decisions to ban or legalise cannabis should be based on other considerations. Now, I emphasise moderate and little. I'm not saying it has no effect or that heavy and sustained use are not harmful, but I specifically stated then that moderate and occasional use of cannabis has few ill effects on health. Nonetheless, people constantly bring up the health arguments, and I notice every time they do, they always say, oh, there's just been a recent study which counteracts all that previously went before. I will in a second. No, I'll give away. Yeah.
It's very easy to quote studies all day long, but the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which doesn't take a view on the criminality, but takes a view of the medical evidence that is presented and gives people an opportunity to make up their own mind, does point out that use, even some moderate use, in younger years can lead to increased risk of mental illness in later life?
Well, the honourable member hasn't stated a specific study, but certainly that was not the view of the Lancet review of cannabis. And I find that there's a searching around for evidence. It's policy-based evidence. It's evidence that's been looked for to justify a policy rather than found and leading to a policy. Very similar to the sort of thing we find in the global warming debate.
The question is that this House has considered the e-petition relating to making the production, sale and use of cannabis legal. As many are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, order, order.